Attention in the terminal. Now boarding on track number 8 is train number 1, the All Aboard podcast, which is your excursion into transportation excellence. And I am your conductor, Phil Bell, PB Chris, Mr. 645, your highly trained rail enthusiast, coming to you from the E. Hunter Harrison Chair at the Bell Institute for Advanced Railroad Studies, where there are no degrees because the learning never ceases. And as always, I am here behind this, the Brunswick Green PLB microphone, and I'm glad that we are together here in 2024. I hope you enjoyed Monday's video where we talked about some of the ways that I like to set up to do my railfan trips, and so please share in the comments on that video and also here some of the things that you like to do. And, after I did that, I actually had a buddy of mine named Ed come over, and Ed and I have been friends for many years, a little more than a decade. And Ed is the opposite of a rail enthusiast. In fact, I think you could probably qualify him as just being one step above a train hater. But it reminded me of a fun railfan side trip that we took one day. We were down in Richmond with our friend Nancy, who runs Delaware Dolls. And if you have anyone in your family or your group of friends that's a doll person and loves Barbies, visit her Instagram at mod.about Barbie. Mod.about Barbie. She has amazing content, and she runs Delaware Dolls, where they sell amazing dolls. So shout out to Nancy. But the three of us had been at an event in Richmond, and I ate at the event. Ed had not, so Ed was very, very hungry. He wanted to go to Wendy's, so we're driving to Wendy's, driving down Broad Street. And of course, on Broad Street is Broad Street Station, which used to be the headquarters of the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac, and was also one of the two main train stations in Richmond. Richmond had Broad Street, Main Street, and also a Southern Railway station was a little bit further to the south. Main Street is once again active. Broad Street no longer is, but it is Virginia Science Museum, and behind it is a canal, a Chesapeake and Ohio 284 Berkshire type that I wanted to take a picture of. And I knew, even though I was a driver, that if we went past this, then I wasn't going to be able to go back because nobody was going to want to do that. So I said, oh, it's just right around the corner here. And I turned down the street that takes you behind Broad Street Station from the main drag. And of course, once we got there, this is only about 200 or 300 feet down the road. And I said, oops, I took a wrong turn. But there's a steam engine right here. And I mean, it would be wrong to not take a picture of it. And Ed was just smoldering mad. And even to this day, when I talk about that, he just goes absolutely bonkers. He can't stand it. But while he was here, he had a really good idea that I want to share with you. And, he had picked up his mom from the train station in Alexandria, Virginia. The train was very late. And he was wondering why trains were late and, why that sort of thing would be happening. I told him, well, there's just any variety of factors, but it reminded me of this website here, which is the Transit Docs website, and you can reach that at asm.transitdocs.com, and we'll have a link in the description. And this is probably the best tracker that you're going to find anywhere for intercity passenger trains. In fact, it's even better than the one on the Amtrak website. It actually pulls from both Amtrak's site and Via's site, and what you can do is click on each of those little squares and get the information on the train, not only where it is right now, when it last reported its location, but also where it's been at the particular stops along the route. They also have color codes that show whether the train is on time, late, very late, extremely late, or in the service disruption mode. And of course, the service disruption can be anything from a locomotive is broken down to there's been a derailment or the line is shut down or some other reason why the train isn't operating. So what I encourage you to do is go over and check out the Transit Docs website. And not only will we have it in the description, but we will also be linking it on allthingstrains.com, which should be your hub for railroad knowledge. So start your day at allthingstrains.com. Now, another site that I wanted to show you is one that we discussed, in yesterday's or Monday's stream about how I plan railfan trip. And this is railfanguides.com. railfan.us. And I had a chance to meet the gentleman who runs the site at the Towson Train Show, which is another reason why you should always come out and visit us at train shows, because in addition to me being there and us being able to talk about trains, you're also going to find other rail fans, some of whom may be famous or well-known or be operating some of these sites. And I've been lucky to meet people like Larry Goulsby, who is a great railroad writer, rail fan writer, obviously the gentleman who's behind railfanguides.us and so on. And so this is actually one of the pages that he has, and that talks about the R&P subdivision. And if you look really closely, if you zoom in, you'll see there's a check mark there on Gunston Cove Road. And what do you know? That's the place where I go to watch trains. And the check mark shows it's a good photo location, because it's not just good, it's actually a great photo location. That gives you some idea about the detail that you'll find there on Railfan Guides and why it is such a helpful website when you're going out to chase trains. Now, I want to then get into our main event today, which is talking about trains with no crew, no couplers, and no engines. And I know, if you're like me and you hear that, no crew, no couplers, and no engines, you're wondering, are there even going to be tracks, or is this even a train? Well, it's interesting. So what we're talking about here is a company called Parallel Systems that was founded by a group of engineers who came from SpaceX. So they automatically have a great pedigree as far as developing new things. But before we get there and discuss Parallel Systems in depth, I want to talk a little bit about what makes freight rail important, what makes it effective, and why it matters what a company like Parallel Systems is doing. So the first thing to talk about is, what is a freight train? And a freight train is an aggregator. That's why it is so much different from most trucks. See, most trucks that you see going down the highway, they have one load that is going from one place to another. One shipper, one receiver. That's it. Now, that can be very good because it's easy to load one truck, and that can be up to 80,000 pounds to travel on most of the, or all of, the U.S. highway network. There's some states, such as Michigan, that will allow up to 100,000 pounds and maybe even more on non-U.S. highways. So that will be state roads or designated state roads. And so you load one truck, you take it from point A to point B, and that's the ball game. And then, of course, the truck driver may have to find some backhaul so he can get back to where he started from, depending on who he's driving for, if he's an independent trucker or otherwise. But that's how trucking works. Now, you also have LTL, less than truckload, which is a little bit more like what you'll find on UPS or FedEx, where you'll have several different loads being located in the same truck. But LTL is much smaller business than truckload freight, which is the primary thing. Now, railroads do very little in the way of LCL, or less than carload, anymore, but they do a lot of carload freight. And so that means when you see a manifest freight, and by manifest freight, we mean typically general merchandise coming down the track, you will have a variety of different shippers and receivers represented in the freight cars that you see in that train. So right behind the locomotives, you might have a block of box cars that are carrying newsprint. That newsprint could come from someone like Abitibi in Quebec and be going to one of my local newspapers, the Bergen Record in New Jersey. In fact, they were served for many years right by the New York, Susquehanna, and Western, and you could see those newsprint cars, and I do believe they came from Quebec for years, to come down there and be unloaded and then used to print the next day's newspaper. So in combining all of those different loads from different shippers, you're able to take advantage of the economies of scale in several ways. The first economy comes from the rail cars themselves. You could think in some cases it will take 2, 3, 4 or more trucks to comprise what goes into just one rail car. That's why it's so effective to ship by train. Then the other economy you're taking advantage of is the aggregation, because now those shippers have basically put their money together to get that shipment moved from a variety of points to a variety of other points. Now, that also means, though, that rail cars must be periodically sorted along the way, the same way that the post office or UPS or FedEx will have to sort their packages as they move from their origin to destination. Those delivery services have to get them out of the mailboxes where you put them into one truck, then get them out of that truck, and split them up among a variety of different trucks to get them to somewhere else. Well, likewise, the railroads will take freight cars from a variety of origination points, take them to a yard where they'll be assembled into a train, then move that train along the line, and at different points, pull some of those cars off, either for final delivery or for to be inserted into another train to take to another location. So that typically means you have you have a variety of ways of doing that. The two main ways that we look at today are, number one, block swapping. And block swapping has become much more prevalent now that precision scheduled railroading, or some element of it, is being used by every major Class 1 railroad. And that is where one train will come along and uncouple a portion of that train and leave it on a siding and go on about its business. Then another train will come along that's going to a different location, pick up that block or group cut of cars or group of cars, depending on how you'd like to say it. Typically in railroading, we call it a cut. Attach it to that train and then move it to another location. That's what block swapping is. The other way of doing it, which is more traditional, is with a hump yard. And I will show you a little example of a hump yard, because that's actually one of my favorite aspects of railroading, even though it has been a little more out of favor of late. And in a hump yard, you will bring a train into the yard, shove the cars up over a small hill called a hump, and then uncouple them at the top of the hill, where they will roll down into the bowl, which is where all of the tracks are to be classified. And they will go to different tracks based on where the manifest information, which is the paperwork related to the train, says they're supposed to go. So let's go back to our friend Nancy, who sells Barbie dolls. Let's say that she actually made them, and she was receiving carloads of plastic pellets that would ultimately be melted down and made into the dolls themselves. So that set of cars, let's say 3 carloads of plastic pellets in a covered hopper, they would be detached and they would roll down one track. And then eventually the track that they're on, they would be joined by other cars from other trains and put into, for example, a local train to make the final delivery. Now, hump yards are were revolutionary when they were first introduced, because this meant you didn't have to have a variety of locomotives and crews going through the yard and shifting the cars back and forth, take them off one track and put them on another. This could be done by gravity, so it required fewer people, and it was good. The problem, though, as you see right there in the picture, if you look to the right, you see the guys next to the main track there that are doing work. Hump yards are very large. They require a lot of maintenance, and as with any yard facility, you will find out that no yard makes any money. It's an activity that is important to the work of moving trains, but it is not one for which you are paid. Technically, you are, because you're getting some portion of the revenue that you use is being used to defray the cost of hump yards, but it's a very expensive activity that doesn't have any direct compensation, and therefore railroads look for ways that they can cut down on this, because as you would with any activity that is hard to make money off of. So that brings us to parallel systems. And parallel systems, as I mentioned, it was founded by 3 guys who came from SpaceX. The first one is Matt Soul, and he has a background in avionics, while John Howard, his is in engineering and lithium-ion batteries. Remember that, because that will be important later. And then Ben Stabler. Ben Stabler has worked in both hardware and software. And according to .LA, and we will link their article in the description as well, they received $49.55 million in Series A venture capital funding during 2022. And this came from several companies, including Anthos Capital, Congruent Ventures, and Embark Ventures. And I want to stop there for a second and talk about why that is a real interesting breakthrough for those of us in railroading, because it's been a long time, really since the 1980s, that you've seen any substantial venture capital money flowing into any part of the rail industry. Now, venture capital and private equity does routinely invest in railroads and rail suppliers, tend to draw from the same pots of money. That will be primarily, number one, university endowments. So if you've been following the now former president of Harvard University, Claudine Gay, you know that Harvard is a very, very wealthy institution. And part of the reason it's so wealthy is because they put a lot of their money into private equity and venture capital. And the interesting thing for you liberals out there, just so you know, while the universities will go around and say that private equity and venture capital are terrible, just so you know that a lot of the way they get their money is by investing in, you guessed it, private equity and venture capital. And the same goes for unions, because a lot of union pension funds invest in private equity and venture capital. And what these firms do is they will take that investment, put it into different funds. So it's not just one company doing the investment, but you have different funds, and those different funds will actually invest in these companies. Venture capital does the investing so that they expect to receive their payout either when a strategic acquirer, so in this case would be someone like Freight Car America or Gunderson, would come along and potentially buy Parallel Systems after it gets a product established and is generating some kind of value, or by listing these stocks on a stock exchange, such as the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. Whereas private equity, who does generally invest more in railroading, they tend to get their returns through cash flows. So the reason why private equity typically invests in rail or rail suppliers is because they are very good cash flow businesses. They generate a lot of cash each and every day. Those cash flows are relatively consistent. Sure, they have their ups and downs, but they are relatively consistent. And that means there's a lot of money there that can be used to pay dividends. And dividends is the primary way that private equity investors will receive their money. So the number one way is dividends, and the number two is through the cash out. The cash outs, the reason why, and I know some of you might agree with me, the reason why the cash out can always be a little bit of an up and down affair is because a lot of times private equity invests in businesses that are more mature, so the cash flows may be declining, but the cash flow still can be, taken from the company and used to pay the investors. So that gives you an idea of how private equity and venture capital work. The reason why it's so rare, though, for venture capital to get involved in railroading is because, as I said, railroading is a mature industry, and it's not as likely that you are going to see a big one-day pop when a company comes to a stock exchange. So the last time you really saw something like that was when Wisconsin Central went public back in the 1990s, and then it continued to act, as many have said, a lot more like a tech company in its stock performance than it did a traditional railroad. Now, of course, we all know that ultimately fell apart, and Ed Burkhart, who was behind it, was thrown out of the company, and then it was taken over by Canadian National. So that story was relatively short-lived, but the fact that you have these venture investors getting involved, that shows that, something very different is here. But what I want to highlight, though, about this is what they're doing. So first of all, what Parallel Systems is doing is not just making rail cars. They're making battery-powered, autonomous rail cars. And these cars do not need crews because they can move themselves. They do not need locomotives because they can move themselves. And they need very little other than a dispatcher and the computer to determine, and when I say the computer, I mean the computer system that would be overseeing them, as well as the various signal systems and so on that are associated with the railroad that they're operating over. And they could act almost like trucks on rail. And so let me give you a little idea, and let's hope our video works. And so we've been trying to record this screen a couple of times since your buddy Phil here is a highly trained rail enthusiast, but he's not exactly a highly trained broadcast specialist as Rush Limbaugh from the EIB, there we go, from the EIB network was. So here we go. Let me just transition over, and I will explain a little bit about this video as it goes forward. So first, you see a shipping container, which is a regular shipping container that we typically see either, on a lot of the intermodal trains. It's mounted on a car that does not, as you notice that, have any couplers. And so if you see this, look what happens. Things come together, but they don't couple. Because what they're going to do, rather than a traditional train where we would hook everything up with the couplers, and then the locomotive would pull them. They're actually going to do what's called platooning. And platooning has been discussed extensively as it goes to autonomous trucking, because that would have several of the autonomous trucks operating closely together in more of a convoy. Well, that's what's envisioned by parallel systems. So you can see right now, one of the biggest difficulties that we have when it comes to classifying rail cars is the fact that someone has to go up and uncouple them. There have been ways to streamline this process, and a good example are some of the couplers that you'll see on transit vehicles such as the MBTA's Green Line streetcars or New Jersey Transit's Jersey Arrow MUs, where a lot of this can be handled without somebody getting on the ground. But in general, this is what you have here. In general, we have our traditional Janney couplers, and you have to couple them or uncouple them, use the coupler lift bar to pull the pin out, or bring them together to drop the pin and couple the cars. But that's not what parallel systems is going to do. They're doing exactly what you see in this video, where the cars now come near each other, and then, as you're seeing right now, they subsequently operate in tandem, or as I said, in a platoon. And so this will make it, once they get to a location where they need to be separated from another car or taken out of the platoon, far easier for them to do that than if something had to be an actual hard coupling had to be activated. And you can see, obviously, as I mentioned before, there are no locomotives here. Those cars are just rolling right down the track by themselves, battery powered, with seemingly effortlessly. And there's another view right there where you can see the wheels are turning, but there is no coupling. And that gives you an idea of what parallel systems is aiming to bring to the rail industry. Now, you're probably thinking, well, wait a second, Phil. That doesn't look like any train that I've seen before. And you're right, it's not. What makes this so interesting, and really does give me a lot of interest in what is going on, is that it gives the opportunity to reach a larger customer base. See, what we talked about earlier is how rail cars are very large. And, if you're able to take the loads of 2, 3, or 4 semi-trucks and put them in one car, that means the shippers who are using that car have to be shipping the type of volume that will be able to take advantage of it. And that's one of the big reasons why, for example, if you look at a large shopping center, like my favorite mall of all time, the Garden State Plaza in Paramus, New Jersey, you don't see any any railroad tracks anywhere nearby. You don't see cars being spotted at the Garden State Plaza and then having them unloaded. Now, in theory, when you look at a facility that large, you would think, well, yeah, there's got to be a lot of freight that comes in here. And there is a lot of freight that goes in, but it goes in smaller amounts, because maybe you're only bringing some dresses for a dress store, or you're bringing some sunglasses for the sunglass hut or something like that. So the freight is getting shipped there, but it's getting shipped in relatively small amounts. Sure, there might be one point at which there is so much freight, so many sunglasses, that it could be shipped in a rail car, but that's probably only going to happen after they get unloaded from a ship from China. And oh, by the way, nowadays they're coming in shipping containers, such as what you saw on the demonstration by Parallel Systems, and those are being unloaded and moved by truck to the final destination. Well, what this enables is for the railroad, for that longer haul, that regional haul that we're talking about, to now, in some ways, when necessary, take a form that is a lot like putting a bunch of trucks together, while then taking advantage of the energy advantages that railroads have. So it takes about 2 times more energy to move a truck, a rubber wheel, which is what trucks have, over an asphalt road. So 2 times more energy than it does to move a steel wheel over a steel rail. So if you had some way that you could move that truck over or truck size commodity over a rail, then you would not only save on the energy that it requires, which is cost, but you would also have the ability to get away from things such as traffic jams and rules such as, oh, you can't drive this truck down here, and or clearances that are too low to bring the semi through, because most cases railroads do have the clearances to actually, in all cases, railroads have the clearances to move something as low as what you saw there in the parallel systems. So that, when put in context of where railroads are and where railroads have been, is very, very interesting. So I've been reading Merging Lines by Richard Saunders Jr., and that will actually be the book that we do our book review for February, because it's a hefty book, but it's an amazing book, and a lot of fun, much more like a soap opera of the rails than it is anything else, but a very good historical book. But one of the things they talk about was the travel time over relatively short distances in New England in the 1950s and 1960s. And one example that Saunders gives is he talks about that the Boston and Maine would take about 80 hours to move a car from the Boston area to be interchanged with the New York Central and the Albany area. Now, there were several different yards, but primarily the Alfred E. Perlman Yard, Selkirk, which actually was opened in the Penn at the end of the New York Central, beginning of the Penn Central era. But it take about 80 hours, so basically 80 hours to cross Taxachusetts. And then if you look back, you'll realize even then it didn't take that long to drive the same load across. So sure, you might have to have more guys do it, but you could get it in a much, much faster time. And remember why this matters, because inventory costs companies money. You've got to pay, even if it's on credit, your supplier for the inventory you receive. So all the time that it spends being moved from point A to point B, whether it's on a train or a truck, is costing you money. That's money that you had to put out. That's money that you can't use for something else, or money that you can't use to pay shareholders. And then that could impede your ability to pay your employees. That could impede your ability to pay back your bank loans, depending on how long that inventory is not available for sale. So that's why, even though railroads enjoy a substantial cost advantage thanks to their natural benefits, a lot of times you would see companies, particularly in the era of railroads decline in the mid 1900s, and I hate to say that, kind of like sounds like the mid 1800s, the mid 1900s, in the 20th century when I was born, which unfortunately to some of you makes me sound like an old man, but I'm not. That's why you saw a lot of companies opt to ship by truck, even though it costs more, because it didn't cost as much as having your inventory be stranded idle for quite some time. So looking in that context, and in the fact that so much of that freight left and never came back, now you think, well, maybe if something like that comes along where you could simply take a shipping container, one shipping container could now become a profitable train load for a short line, for a regional, and most certainly for a class one. And oh, by the way, a lot of the needs to classify larger cars in long trains and so forth could be eliminated or at least reduced. That's where so much of the opportunity is in parallel systems, and why the venture funding folks have gotten into it, and also why folks from SpaceX, and I mean, think about it, these people decided, you know what, we're not going to space now, we are going to go where no man has gone in a long time, in some cases, which is to innovate in the rail industry. So this is very significant, what you're seeing here. The other thing I want you to think about as we consider what's going to happen here is that rail labor is going to both apply a lot of pressure, but they're also going to see a lot of pressure. Now, the current crop of national conservative Republicans and also Democrats, liberal, conservative, and so forth they have been doing all they can to embrace blue collar workers. National conservatives have, Republicans typically have not been seen as the party of the blue collar worker. I'm a conservative Republican. I've always believed that we are, but a lot of people did not, because for many years our party was seen as more the golf club party, because it was for many years the party of management. And Democrats had a very, very strong relationship with those in labor, because a lot of the same people, and many of them were socialists who were behind the Democrat Party, they were also behind a lot of the growth of labor unions in the early to mid 20th century. So In recent years, though, Democrats have lost a lot of blue collar workers, and Republicans, under the national conservatism banner, have embraced them. So, what does that mean? You've got one party that wants to get labor back, you've got the other party that's building a relationship. And so, when you see an era of potentially autonomous vehicles where labor, whether we're talking about labor in the trucking industry and labor in the rail industry, are going to see job reductions, you're going to see both parties come out and fight this. However, at the same time, you're going to have a lot of customers that will look out and say, hold on a second. I want to have more transportation options, and I would like to have the ability to ship by rail as if I were shipping by truck. So that could mean in the 250 to 500 mile trip, these could play a pivotal role, even if the final version potentially does have couplers and may even travel in a more traditional train for part of the time. You could see a lot of short lines go out and say, hey, this will be beneficial in allowing us to earn a lot more business that we're currently not able to do, because we look out, we open our door every day and we see trucks going 100, 150 miles right down past our door. But guess what? We could be hauling that commodity if they would just give us a chance, but the economics don't quite work. But with something like what Parallel Systems is doing with that autonomous battery-powered vehicle and being able to move something as small as one shipping container to become a full carload or a full train load profitably, well, this could happen. So you will see a lot of political pressure from both sides. And the hard part is going to be that guess who will be stuck in the middle? It will be you, the consumer. Some of you who are members of labor unions, some of you who are Republicans, who are Democrats or otherwise, but many of you who simply go to the store and say, I don't want to pay these prices anymore. So anything that helps to bring that cost down and make products more available will be beneficial to you. And so I think you're going to see a lot of consumers really playing a pivotal role in if something like this comes about. The final thing is, where is the overall market for autonomous vehicles right now? You have seen many of these, or at least I should say some of the companies like Waymo, which, if I recall correctly, is part of Google, leave the autonomous trucking market to focus on other things, whether it is moving people or other related aspects of it, but putting the trucking to the side. At the same time, Torque and Aurora are other companies in it, and they've continued to operate. And it's a lot of the same investors who are behind all of these, and they're placing their bets. So that means more money is going to continue to flow into this sector. And while you probably will not see a Parallel Systems train rolling down the track, and by the way, for my fellow rail enthusiast photographers out there, on the bright side, we're not going to have to worry about if we miss the lead unit or getting the number on it. But on the downside, there's not going to be anybody to wave to while the train goes down the track. But you probably won't see it soon unless you're on a couple of the G&W's railroads. There's a couple in Georgia. The Heart of Georgia is one, and I think the Georgia Central is the other, where Parallel Systems and Genesee and Wyoming, who is the owner of those two short lines, has applied to have to allow for these to be tested on those carriers' lines, which are, we're not talking about just complete 5-10 mile per hour track branch lines. Is actually going to offer a variety, whether we're talking about sidings, industrial tracks, and medium speed trackage, because both of these have pretty substantial franchises in the state of Georgia. And also because the state of Georgia has become a big hub for innovation itself. And with so many large corporations headquartered in Atlanta, you can bet that a lot of those companies will be taking note and watching that in person to see how it goes. So I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation about what we could see with Parallel Systems' effort to build trains that have no crew, no couplers, and no engines. We'll go ahead and add a link to Parallel Systems' website in the description as well. And stay tuned, because tomorrow, on Thursday, we will be doing our first book review on William and Henry Walters, which is a great book about the two people who were the most responsible for the early years of the Atlantic Coastline Railroad, which is a key part of CSX transportation. And we have been talking extensively about these routes, whether it is my reminiscence of riding on passenger trains or describing what led to the seaboard coastline and a lot of the railroad development in the southeastern United States. So I hope you will stick with us for that. It will be out at noon tomorrow as well. As always, if you have any ideas on what topics you would like to have us cover, please send me an email at info, at allaboard.media. That's info at allaboard.media. We will see you on the main line. Thank you so much for being with us on this excursion into transportation excellence. And I hope you have a great day, and make sure to get out there as much as you can. If you're a rail enthusiast, take some pictures, share them with us. And if you're not a rail enthusiast, become a rail enthusiast soon. Thanks again, and I hope you have a great day.